Good afternoon and welcome to our weekly livestock market update. I'm Brownfield News Anchor reporter Meghan Grebner. With us is University of Missouri livestock market analyst Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Meghan.
You know what, as we get into it this week, we have a couple of reports to talk about from USDA, but let's start first and talk about export data that came out on Monday, because that's really big news for the livestock industry.
Absolutely. When you look at what we got in terms of monthly export sales data for November of 2016 that was released on Monday of this week, it gave us a lot of good news for both beef and pork markets. When you look at pork to begin with, November volume was the highest we'd seen for a month so far this year. We topped the next nearest month by 10%, and that was May of this year, 18% above a year earlier levels of pork exports. Mexico important, up about 31 million pounds. Japan up about 21 million pounds. The Chinese also increased about 12, but that Mexico market was very important, as we really lagged in Mexico for the first few months of 2016, and seeing them come back more strongly, I guess, might give us some hope that we can continue that into 2017. Although we talk about China sitting there in third place, I just remind us that although up 12 million pounds, they still lag relative to the kinds of increases that we would have seen in other times going into China. On the beef side, export volume highest since July of 2013. We're up about 23% relative to the previous year. So both sides of that story of beef and pork, we've really seen some important things occurring, and I think that might have been part of the reason why we saw some price strength that we did in the latter part of 2016, is that export demand stayed strong.
Scott, we talk about the export markets. How does that correlate to the WASTI report that USDA released today, and what information do we take from there, and how maybe both of those reports play on U.S. markets here?
Yeah, so I certainly think we can see this push-pull of what's been strong export demand, but at the same time we see strong domestic supplies. With the WASDE report we got out today, you know, the thing that catches my eye, number one, USDA revising pork production, their pork production estimate for 2017 higher. And I think by and large a result of the hogs and pigs report that we got out at the end of 2016. But 217.7 pounds per person of red meats and poultry in 2017. We really haven't been at that level since 2007. So supply side growing, and I just remind you, in 2007, where we were on prices, fed cattle sitting at 93 cents a pound. That's a far cry from what we might estimate, or USDA would estimate, at closer to $1.10 in 2017. So just trying to remind us that we've got this push and pull going on. Domestic supplies are going to be large as we go through 2017, and we need things like exports to continue to grow.
Really to help keep our market prices and our prices received elevated, I'm assuming?
At least to try to hold the line. I guess as we look at 2017, we look at price estimates for cattle and hogs, and I'll say maybe more sideways than we've been for a while. But if exports were to slow down tremendously, maybe that sideways becomes more of a downhill than we really want. And so that's I think the battle that we have in these markets as we look ahead. Both domestic and international demand needs to be strong to try to keep us from what's been a downhill slide, as you know, since really early 2015 in both pork and beef. I think we have a chance in 2017 to be flatter generally, but it does take both sides of strong export and domestic demand to make that happen.
Fair to finish returns came out this week, Scott. As we look at that, what does that indicate, and what does that mean for U.S. pork producers?
Well, so when we see what came from Iowa State University for December fair to finish returns, they're showing a loss of $5.93 a hundred for December. So maybe not good news, but relative to where we were in November, we actually saw a turnaround. There we were talking about losing $35 a head, so a little better situation, although still a little bit of red ink flowing. I think it's important to remind ourselves that it's both sides of that equation that matter. both what we're going to be paid for those hogs as well as what we have in terms of input costs. But it's been a much tougher into 2016 for the pork industry. Thank goodness we got a little price strength in the latter part to help offset what otherwise was a little bit of red ink.
Let's talk a little bit about those prices, whether it's input prices or prices received for pork producers, and you could put cattle producers in there as well. We hammer a lot about knowing our cost of production. When we're looking at it on a pig basis or on a cow basis, how does that differ? And maybe what are we looking for specifically to know how to maintain or reduce some of the red ink on our operations?
Yeah, so I will say when I look at the variability across individual producers in cost of production, I would have often said that I think over time we're narrowing that distribution. That is, as higher cost producers exited these businesses, the remaining producers' cost of production was much narrower from low cost producer to high cost producer. Yet I think when you look at the data that we have available from USDA, it keeps telling me those low to high cost estimates are much larger or much wider. So I think if you ask any producer, they're always a low cost producer. I haven't met a high cost producer yet, but I think it's important to remind ourselves that we have to know where everybody else sits. It's not only our cost, but really where do we compare? Because ultimately those are going to stay in business long term. They're going to have a much greater chance of staying in business if they're at the low end of that cost. So it's know your own cost, but also know where you sit relative to everybody else. And that everybody else might be within your state, within your country, or within the world. As we get more broad, it matters what cost of production looks like in other countries compared to yours as well.
Speaking of global markets, we don't talk a lot about poultry, but really last Friday, some pretty big news. South Korea has been hit hard with the avian influenza outbreak. They've lost 26 million layers, and their egg shortage rivals or is worse than what the U.S. went through in recent years. As they head into their Lunar New Year, which is their big egg demand holiday, they need eggs. And for the first time, they're looking to the U.S. For large purchases. How does that impact our egg market here?
Yeah, so it has been a positive. I think when you look at egg markets of late, we could probably say 15, 20 cents a dozen increase in prices that we've seen here in the United States over the last few days as a result of the announcement in South Korea. So it has been important to those markets. And remember, it's the first time that we've seen the chance to export eggs to South Korea since they banned egg trade with us from our own AI outbreak back in 2015. So a market that's now open to us provides us some nice market lift in what otherwise has been a very tough situation for egg producers in this country as egg supplies have been abundant. So it's nice to find another home for U.S. eggs, and it comes at a good time for us in terms of U.S. producers.
You talk about egg prices being low here, and we talked about that during December and in recent months. Do U.S. consumers need to worry about a rise in egg prices if we're all of a sudden exporting a large amount of eggs to a market we haven't been exporting to in recent time?
Well, so I certainly think we can get some lift out of what's been going on, and I don't know that most consumers are going to notice 15 or 20 cents a dozen. And many times I think when you think about the news that we get, so a lot of very positive news right now with the ability for us to be able to export eggs to South Korea. However, you have to understand that's still a very small proportion of egg production that occurs in this country. So I don't want to overstate what I think might happen. And by the way, don't forget, when you think about our own recovery from AI in this country, once those layers get back online, and hopefully they can, in South Korea, they clear up their own AI problems in the next several months. Once that domestic production comes back online, those are markets that probably won't stay as strong as we're likely to see over the next several weeks as a result of that AI outbreak. So I think we only see a short-term spike in trade with South Korea and eggs, and that will likely slow down as we go through 2017.
Scott, anything else? Any other notables from the markets this week that we've seen on the livestock side?
I don't think we've seen much else. It's I think as you look at kind of current markets, still a lot of sideways going on as we look through the week. We started stronger in cattle markets on the future side. We've kind of slid down of late. We were a little higher on hog prices as we went through the week. So I'm encouraged that demand for hogs and pork stays fairly strong as we've started 2017, and hopefully that continues. But I think we are kind of searching for that big story that comes along that either moves us higher or lower in terms of livestock markets.
Scott, good to see you. Next week, we have a pretty special event in store and a special edition of our weekly livestock market update. I will be with you in Springfield, Missouri at the Heart of America Dairy Expo. So we look forward to seeing you there as well. I
look forward to seeing you, Megan.
If you have questions for Scott, go to our website, brownfieldagnews.com, and click on the Submit Your Question link. You can also subscribe to have our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning to enjoy with your coffee. Have a great weekend. I'm Megan Grebner on Brownfield.